Before 2014, Ferguson, Missouri was a relatively unknown black town to people outside of the St. Louis area. Ferguson is situated in St. Louis County in Missouri, the same county that holds St. Louis City. But what's interesting about the governance dynamics of St. Louis and the greater St. Louis area is that St. Louis, being the largest city in the county, is independent from the actual county of St. Louis. So while the city of St. Louis was bringing in a large amount of black people from the Deep South during the Great Migration, many of the surrounding areas, like Ferguson, was predominantly white, like 99% white. But as the years went on, Ferguson started to see a shift in the demographics of their population. They actually started to see this shift around the 1980s, where the black population in Ferguson during that time rose as high as 14%. And after the black population rose in the 80s, by the 2000s, Ferguson started to see the balance of black people outnumbering white people. And by the time 2014 came around, the black population was estimated to be almost 70%. But as the residents became more black, the poverty also rose. It was estimated that 22% of Ferguson residents in 2014 was below the poverty line. Now, this isn't because black people are inherently poor, but several external factors play in this rise of poverty. Ferguson, just like any other town that went from white to black, started to see disinvestment from the city, not just from the businesses, but also from the government as well. With businesses leaving and resources being more scarce now, Ferguson became the typical all-black city for racial economic segregation. Once the white population started to leave, so did the resources. But that's not all for Ferguson residents. In the midst of balancing the budget, the government of Ferguson in 2014, which was still majority white, decided to lay the burden on the backs of its black residents. The city and law enforcement started escalating traffic fines and court fines. These items generated so much that it was estimated that 1/4 of the city of Ferguson's revenue was accounted with the court and traffic fines. Police started issuing tickets for everything, not just the standard regular moving violations like running a red light, but issuing tickets like loud music and sagging pants. Yes, sagging pants. And when somebody does not have the money to pay for all of these fines, a warrant is issued out for your arrest. In 2013, the Ferguson Municipal Court issued 33,000 arrest warrants for nonviolent offenses, and in a city with only 21,000 people. And it doesn't make the situation any better when 50 of the 53 Ferguson police officers in 2014 were white. On the afternoon of August 9th, 2014, the city of Ferguson gained the national and global spotlight under a situation that was endemic to their living conditions. On that fateful day, an 18-year-old young black teenager named Michael Brown and his friend Dorian Johnson had a fatal encounter with Ferguson police officer Darren Wilson. Officer Wilson shot Mike Brown 6 times, killing him dead. Much of what happened and what led to Officer Wilson's shooting of Mike Brown is up for speculation because eyewitness testimonies between Officer Wilson and Mike Brown's friend Dorian Johnson was conflicting. There is also no footage. This was before body cameras were required to be worn and on by law enforcement. However, what was evident was that Mike Brown was not armed and his body was laid on the ground where he was shot for 3 hours. Witnesses from the surrounding area saw this, and crowds of people started to get hostile near the crime scene. Coming off of decades of political misconduct and police brutality in Ferguson, the boiling point was about to erupt. This is also coming off the heels of Eric Garner's murder in New York City in that year in May, and that murder was filmed, and the killing of John Crawford III in a Walmart in Ohio 4 days before Mike Brown's tragic murder. Much of the anger and frustration of Black Ferguson residents began to flare. Peaceful protests started to begin on August 10th. However, Ferguson police and local police in that area assembled hundreds of officers and began to prepare for a riot. Now, this frustrated protesters because why do riot protocols need to be in place when the protest was nonviolent? Unfortunately, in response to the protests, which was nonviolent at that point, police responded with tear gas, rubber bullets, and even live bullets. The protesters, in response to the police, started to destroy property and also started throwing rocks and Molotov cocktails at the police. This rebellion went on for 15 days and nights in the Ferguson streets. There was a second wave of protests that was triggered in November when a grand jury decided not to charge Officer Wilson for the shooting and killing of Michael Brown. What was seen in Ferguson was not just a response to the killing of Mike Brown, but decades of economic degradation and police terrorism. This gave rise to the Department of Justice aggressively enforcing consent decrees, not just in areas like Ferguson, but several other municipalities with a legacy of police misconduct. While this did not exactly improve the social and economic situations of Ferguson, this did put in place policies like required body cams on law enforcement on police forces across the country. Now, this didn't stop police violence, but it did make it a little harder to get away with. On the Ferguson local scene, activism was prevalent amongst the residents. Some of the activists went on to bigger things. People like Corey Bush, who was a registered nurse, worked as a triage nurse during the Ferguson uprising. She was actually elected to the U.S. House of Representatives in 2021. While the rise of on-the-ground activism started to flourish, unfortunately, some of these activists were targeted for elimination. One of the more prominent names that came up was Darren Seals, a young Black man involved in several social justice initiatives in Ferguson, was shot dead and his body left in a burning car. But before Seals, there was DeAndre Joshua, who was also shot dead and found in a burning car in November of 2014. Edward Crawford, one of the participants in the Ferguson uprising, was also found dead in a car. Dorian Johnson, Mike Brown's friend the day he was with him when he died, who also popularized the phrase during the Ferguson uprising, "Hands up, don't shoot," was killed last year in September. And when they didn't murder activists, they'd kill somebody that was close to him. Take, for example, Ferguson activist Melissa McKinney's, whose son, Dane Jones, was lynched in her backyard. And when they didn't kill you or a loved one, they would instill tactics to instill fear. Take, for example, the situation of Reverend Darrell Gray, a popular activist in Ferguson who found a package in the driver's seat of his car when he left a radio interview in 2017. He immediately called the police, which brought the bomb squad. But what the police found was not a bomb, but more sadistically, a 6-foot python snake. Reverend Gray also received text messages from an unknown sender with pictures of his wife and also threatening him and his family. When violence and terrorism is used against activists, you know that your movement is working. Ferguson and several other mass demonstrations shows that collectively you have power. Ferguson was an example of mass mobilization. It got the attention of the nation. However, the real power came in organization. That's when it got real and you started seeing certain people being taken out. However, Don't be afraid of the repression of the system, because the more participation you have amongst the people, the less power that they have. They can't kill everyone if enough people are active and involved. Let's mobilize and also organize.